So yes, welcome to my first quarterly trends briefing. I'm planning to do these every quarter, and one of the reasons for that is literally in the name. Let me just make this smaller. In the today, tomorrow. One of the challenges I think life sciences has always had, but is particularly going to be facing as we move forward, is that the nature of the changes that we're seeing within technology and within society is evolving so quickly that the ability to see those trends and enough time to be able to adjust is really critical. And so my goal with the trends briefing is, in a sense, because I'm in this world a lot and I'm looking at what's happening, is to try to pull out what I think is of relevance to the industry. And so who is it that I'm potentially aiming this for, all the content? Definitely what I would call leaders in the organization that are either in sales, marketing, or medical. So if we look at the conversation around omni-channel, customer experience, integrating or not working so much in our silos, there's a lot of change going on within the industry already. And so my goal with these trends briefings is to be able to guide that cohort of people to be seeing what else they might need to now be factoring in within those already existing transformation plans. But also for those that are in leadership roles at a country level, where they're looking at diversity and inclusion, getting sustainability more and more on their radar, and also just their own leaders' development. Leadership models are changing. So again, some of the content each quarter will be applicable for what is definitely, when I say a trend, something that is already now probably in market in other industries. So just to give context for this first session, what I'm going to do, it is literally going to be a fire hose of what I've pulled out that I think is the most topical in 60 minutes. There's a lot of trends I think are relevant, but I've grabbed for this first session the most critical. And so what I'll do is, it may go a little bit over the 60 minutes because I've definitely want to give a bit more visuals to the narrative, particularly for those that aren't familiar with some of the trends or as deep into the trends as what I'm talking about. And so what I'll do is I am recording this session. I'm using a couple of AI tools. Zoom has a really good summary tool, so I'm using that, just FYI. And I'm also using Otter, which is doing a transcription for me and does it very well. So what I'll do is, if you do have questions, if you're still on at the end, I'll pause the recording and we can have some Q&A. But otherwise, I am recording it as well because a lot of people, registered with the intent that they get the recording afterwards. So for those of you that don't know me, I'll just give you a little bit of context to my background. I'm going to do this really quickly. I'm the founder at Divergent Consulting. My background has been in pharmaceutical and life sciences and digital marketing and technology for at least 15 plus years. And so at Divergent, what we do is we focus on team coaching. So if we talk about those transformation efforts that are already in play, omni-channel customer experience, we've got a program designed to not just coach teams through how to pick up and utilize and change behavior, but actually to build high functioning teams across silos that mean that those teams are building in the skills that they need for the future, for the constant change. So they're not just learning to adopt and embed the current change that's happening, but they're actually building mechanisms that mean that as they continually need to evolve, they're building that skill set. So that's what the focus is really around that team capability and team coaching at Divergent. And then for me, as an individual, I work with leadership teams as what I call a chief, a reinvention officer. So when I look at senior leadership teams, these changes, even a lot of what I'm sharing today, it's really hard to find the time to process that. Leaders are obviously quite often have very rigid plans they're already trying to execute on. So my role there is to educate them on some of those those new things, but also to coach that team as well to be a high functioning team so that they're being aligned across the organization and operating in a similar way that's helped supporting the evolution of the organization. So that's just a little bit about who I am. And really, I suppose, just to give some context, that I've got some deep experience within the industry, however, have that benefit by sitting outside, can spend time and observe the trends that I think are relevant for the industry, that I am seeing people not having even mental time and physical time to process. So I want to start with and I'm just going to move. Where are we here? Where's my mouse? No, we'll have to have the bar at the top, maybe. Where's my mouse? I'll find it soon. I want to start with this image. And the reason I want to do that is because when I started Divergent Consulting in 2016, I had this image made up as part of my branding efforts. And it was really to represent the idea that for digital marketing, which is where I was focusing, and technology, is that there were many moving parts and that marketers needed to work with technology parts of the business. And even then, they were in their immature stages in the sense of we now have full teams typically in-house. But they were, you couldn't work in isolation as a marketer without sales. And so there was a lot of components that people weren't connecting the dots because they were still working in their silos. And I feel that where we've got to in the world today and the operating models that we're in, that this image is incredibly still relevant, but it's even more complex. And there's even more that we need to think about outside of our organizations. And I think a lot of what I'm going to share today, you'll see this overlap, that the challenges is we can't anymore think about things in a linear way. We can't just think about our needs or our agenda. We really need to be thinking in a systems way and been thinking about as we plan, but also as we execute, what else is shifting, that we have to have the sensing capability as well, which is where the challenge and the complexity comes in. So let's start with this quote from Frances Valentine. Frances is the founder here in New Zealand from Academy EX. She is highly regarded as an education tech futurist. She's been in this space for a long time and runs a learning academy for, for those typically in the working environment that are wanting to do masters in either change or technology. And so recently she said, complexity, the speed of change and the nature of the variables is so wide right now and dispersed that it's almost impossible to imagine what comes next. And very much that statement comes from where she's looking at with technology. But I do think that the technology, and I didn't plan on focusing specifically on technology today, but once I started to really capture all of my thinking, I felt it was really important I start with this today because I think it's something that the industry is missing. And if we don't have enough time to process, then we won't have enough time to adjust. And so this statement, I think, is critically relevant for us. And you may not agree with this. I'm actually hoping by the end of it you do, because having this awareness of the nature of the change and also just accepting that it's really hard to predict what's coming next, but building in the tools and mechanisms to adjust is what's critical. So based on that, if we look at the word of the year from last year, the end of last year, the word of the year from the Collins Dictionary was permacrises. And permacrises was this, and this is a great quote at the time, a term that perfectly embodies the dizzying sense of lurching from one unprecedented event to another as we wonder bleakly what new horrors might be around the corner. Now, this was at the end of 2022. We were coming off the tail end of COVID. I think, we were sort of adapting to a new state, but feeling like there was a sense of normality. But then the Ukraine war was happening. And so we'd seen supply chain issues with food. And, we're seeing this war happening, which was impacting food supply even more. And then if I look in New Zealand, not long after, we had major floods. And so we've begun to have this feeling we're going from one horror to another. We come into 2023 and we have had continuing wars. And so permacrises very much sums up, in a sense, I hate to use the word nicely, this era that we're in, that we actually shouldn't be naive to the fact that these crises will continue, and we're not likely to be able to predict which crises will come next. So then if we look at the word, one of the word of the years, because as I looked around, there was actually a few more words of the year. But this is the one that I've been seeing talked about online a lot more. And so Merriam-Webster referenced the word authentic. And partly this word has come about because of AI and all the deep fakes and people's awareness that when we look at even bots on social media, how do we know that what we're seeing we can trust even when it comes to news reporting? So this word authentic actually follows quite nicely on if we embrace it, permacrisis has not gone away. And now we've got this challenge of authenticity. And I'm leading with this because I think part of the challenge the industry will continue to face, um, and is already facing, is this idea of we think authenticity, even trust, and we think about your engagements with clinicians, is how there has been that challenge at times is how do you show trust and how do you build trust? But how will you continue to do that even as the industry leans into omni-channel and leveraging the technology tools even more? And I think even at a strategic level, leading with or building authenticity and transparency with what you do will bode really well. And so I want to build in, I suppose, the themes that I've been seeing from what's the narrative in the world before I get into some of the where are we seeing this in action. And so building on these themes again, the word VUCA is not a new word, but it's been used a lot more. If you're not familiar with VUCA, it's this idea that we have volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which makes planning really hard. And part of the challenge, if we reflect on the life science model, has been a planning model that's very rigid and very much planning with the intention of certainty of the variables, or even if the variables change, the ability to adjust has not been a natural part of the model. And a lot of people are trying to build that in right now. They've been adopting agile ways of working, they're building learning cultures. And so VUCA is something that we need to be mindful of. However, what's emerging is another new tool, another name, called BANI. And again, this word isn't new, but it's starting to come out a lot more. So brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. The reason I wanted to share this is what I like about this is what it's saying is actually the world that we're saying has become VUCA is actually has been no different. It's just been our perception of reality. And so if we think about we've had periods of little change, but change has happened, but it's been at a lot slower pace. Now that the pace has increased, it's still the same environment. It's just we're a lot more aware of it. So now we're having a reality check. And so Banny is this idea of let's remove the illusions that we are in a position of strength, that we have control over all the variables, that we can actually plan and predict when we're going to do something, and that we have this illusion that we have all of the knowledge that we need in the moment that we make choices. And I think I'm framing this up deliberately because once I get into sharing some of the trends, I think this is quite important to how they're going to challenge the life science operating model. And I've also then got some insights to how I think the industry needs to start adapting. So part of my goal with these trends briefings is to help connect the dots. I will be doing at times a fire hose of lots of content, but I just don't want to share stuff without a narrative. I'm grabbing content that I think is critical that those in leadership roles leading change are starting to process. So you have time to think about how you would adjust your operating models because if once we get hit with the change, it's a lot harder to be making the change. So I do want to have what I call this bridge from today to tomorrow with the briefing. So I'm going to share just one more framework that I think is relevant if we just do the scene setting for the industry. So there is a framework, a way of thinking called Titanic syndrome. So the Titanic eventually was sunk by the iceberg, but there were many warning signs. There were many things they did that actually would have meant if they had adopted them, they would have avoided the iceberg. And I think, again, part of the challenge for the industry right now is even though everyone's going through what we'd call transformation, at its core, the operating model hasn't fundamentally shifted. And so the industry is at risk of suffering from Titanic syndrome. And so this is a corporate disease where organizations who are facing disruption or potential disruption bring about their own downfall through arrogance, excessive attachment to past success, or an ability to recognize the new and emerging reality. And I don't think the industry wants to be arrogant, but when you haven't had disruption or things have been talked about that haven't eventuated like they have with other industries, it is a trap we can fall into. So again, I want to be able to, I suppose, help the industry recognize these new and emerging reality. And I'm going with the assumption with knowing the leaders that I work with are very conscious that they need to be creating change and they are championing that within their organizations. So let's get into some of the trends and some of the ways you can go about solving for some of these trends that I'm going to share. So one of them is reinvention is the strategy. Um, you know, having a reinvention playbook is a way to have success in this volatile, turbulent world. So what does that mean? Let's look at Accenture as one example. So Accenture does this global disruption index every year. Between 2011 and 2016, the level of global disruption, so their index looks at economic, social, geopolitical, so a number of factors, the disruption level was 4%. Um, have a bit of a guess, I'm going to share in a minute, but what that level of disruption was between 2017 and 2022. For those of you that just missed at the start, I'm just going to be doing a fire hydrant in the 60 minutes, and then I will stop the recording and we can do any Q&A if you want to, or you can stay on. So the level of disruption between that just 2017 and 2022, so not many years, was 200%. So when we talk about this growing awareness of the rate of change, is it just something that we're saying? This data point highlights that there's been a high level of disruption. But if we look back to that image that I shared of many linking parts, we're seeing disruption in many parts of our operating models, which is why we're struggling at times to figure out where we should make change or how do we sense the changes that are coming because they're diverse. And so leading with that, Accenture actually launched this playbook that talks about the total enterprise reinvention. They researched organizations, similar life sciences would have been in there, and mapped their operating model and how they're changing. And those that have evolved their model and are still performing, and they're a small cohort, have embraced reinvention as their strategy. And so what does that mean? Let me just have a bit of water here. So where we in this white paper, they've said reinvention becomes the strategy. So it becomes part of the operating model of the organization. One way you would look at that as a contrast is I'm seeing the industry starting to adopt change management roles. Other industries have done that a while ago, so the industry is slow to do that. We do need change management roles when we look at projects. However, what it still does is a change manager still operates within that silo and it doesn't change at its core the changeability and the adaptability of an organization. So when you put reinvention within the core of the organization as a strategy, it means that people are very open to recognizing maybe what was good even yesterday isn't fit for tomorrow. So again, that means that the operating model has to have a lot different flex to be able to adapt. So they've got digital still at the core. Digital, you're going to see, I'm going to switch out that today with AI, and you'll see why as I go through. And so reinvention in this sense, there was, if we look, it's not on this page, but it was about 8% of companies have made reinvention their core strategy. And that means that they're actually performing better than others and they've got a model that's working for this new world that we're in. And so if you look at point 6, reinvention is continuous. That leads into this idea that change isn't a linear or a project thing. It's not a one-off thing. And that is part of the trap I think the industry needs to be careful with, is that while everyone's going through current transformations, even those transformations are up for disruption right now. So people need to have an ability to be doing sense making and looking up and saying, look, what is still right that we're doing, but what maybe do we need to layer in or adjust as we're doing our transformation programs? Because the timelines that we're seeing with the shifts, so even at a societal level, are accelerating. So just looking a little bit more still at reinvention, PwC does a global CEO survey. Their survey they launched at the start of this year, which was their 26th annual survey. When they asked CEOs, this was their global survey, but if you look at the New Zealand report and the Australian report, there's a common theme here. And so CEOs were actually saying, based on what I do versus what I'd like to do, they would like to spend more time in reinvention. So more time in rather than being so tactical and operational, having time to look at what's happening and making shifts, even when you look at your strategy. And so I want to lead in then to this phrase emergent strategy. It is a phrase that's been around a long time, but as I'm looking at what the narratives that I'm seeing online, what's popping up a lot more is versions of what is an emergent strategy. So let me just give a bit of backstory to what is emergent, and then I'll give you some views of how others are referencing it, and they're meaning it in the sense the same thing as an emergent strategy. So very much in life sciences, even today, I see this. People are using what's called a deliberate strategy approach. Comes from Porter, comes from the 1980s, the same time as emergent strategy evolved. So deliberate strategy has boded well for most industries up until now. It's where, if you look at the bottom there, where it emphasizes the role of thinking and planning before acting. That's very much what we see with brand planning. People are looking at the numbers, they're looking at what they may be looking at where they landed from last year, but they're looking at the shifts in the marketplace. They then plan ahead for the 12 months, and it's very much a lot of thinking and planning ahead. And then they're measured on success of that. So deliberate strategy is very much ingrained in the operating model for life sciences. The differences with emergent strategy is it even challenges were you strategic, if we think strategic imperative strategy, is that right? It may be that it was right when you went live into market, but maybe something changed or your assumptions were wrong. So emergent strategy not only challenges the tactical execution based on what we see happens in reality, but even the foundations of the strategy might have been wrong. And so instead of having more time spent in planning and predicting, we need to spend more time getting into market as fast as we can so that we're looking at strategy as as a process for continuous reinvention. So part of the challenge I think the industry has faced with doing this is everyone's very reliant on a lot of data. They've been gathering data that they have from in hindsight, but having either data in real time to adapt, or what I more often find is people say they're so busy just executing what they're already doing, they don't have time to review the current performance data in real time. So this is what starts to challenge the operating model, is how does the industry start to enable a shift to emergent strategy and even ways of working that give people time to be able to have continuous either improvement or reinvention of their strategic approach. So here's some narrative. I think just a few data points when I start to see that this idea of embracing emergent strategies, what is already happening in other industries. So Wharton here, this was a 2022 article, but talked about firms can have this, they have this paradox of preparedness. And so what's happening, if I look at the quote at the bottom there, leaders filter warning signals through the cataracts of self-deception, myopia, and inertia. Has similar language to the Titanic syndrome. So what's happening and to some degree is that if you've had literally, if we think about life sciences, years of this preparedness operating model, it feels very comfortable, feels very familiar. It's quite a challenge to step into a new operating model. And I'm sure that we know there are companies evolving at their roots, their planning approach. So we have to, in a sense, release this idea of having actually even thinking we can be prepared for all scenarios. So we have to, in a sense, it says overcome, but I would use the word, let's just let that go. If we think about Banny and the illusion that we can control everything, let's release that and let it go. This is an article from June this year from Gartner, which says leading through volatility with adaptive strategy. So what you'll see is probably emergent strategy is referenced as adaptive, this ability that we want to be able to adapt based on what's happening. And so they've got in this article a bit of a framework for how you can build that into your organization. So it says there, start execution as early as possible, respond to changes as they happen, embrace exploring and uncertainty, and involve everyone in strategy. And if we think about when we say involve everyone, we're meaning all of the stakeholders that have a view of the world. The challenge is, right now, I think that sounds simple in practice, but the industry is still struggling with that because they haven't changed that operating model at its core. So I am hoping that with some of what I'm going to share today will actually give you some strategies using technology how to do this. Again, when I think about legacy tech systems, data and silos, people feel really uncertain to go live if they don't have all of that data. So you end up needing some culture shifts to embrace a learning culture. And so that means leaders need to have new training, but it also means that actually there is possibly a way to mitigate the high need for certainty by using technology. And I'm going to share some of that today. And then we're still in this emergent strategy phrase. This is an image on the right here from Amy Webb. I really like Amy Webb as a futurist. If you're interested in breaking down AI in a language that makes sense, that isn't all doom and gloom, even though she's a realist, I'd really highly recommend listening to Amy. But this is her framework that she uses to help people do strategic planning as we recognize that future planning, the further out we go, the harder it gets to plan. The thing I would highlight here, and I think this overlays really well in life science planning, what I see missing is everyone's very focused on 12-month cycles and tactical, even strategy's only 12 months. That even if the organization has a longer view from a pipeline point of view, if we talk about omni-channel or customer experience, that vision is very technology-led. People aren't sure what it might look like. So the brands don't themselves have a real vision for how they want to involve their engagement strategy. So I think if brands might in the today, tomorrow bridging program that we run, the first thing I do with brands is have them start to visualize what they do with their diverse stakeholders, how their operating today might vary in the future. They don't need to know everything, but they need to start to have a vision for how they want to show up differently for clinicians and patients. And so just to close out this loop around strategy, Roger Dennis is actually based in New Zealand, but he works globally and is, I like a lot of what I see him share. And I just thought this was really nice here on the left LinkedIn post where he says, this is what he said at the top there. Dealing effectively with slow burn crises therefore depends on leaders recognizing early warning signs and being prepared to revisit plans and even rethink the strategy being followed. That's exactly what emergent strategy is, in order to be able to change course before crises conditions arise. I'm going to get my tongue around this. That precipice, sadly, is not common. So he's talking about all organizations. So I think um, in the life sciences, what I see people challenge with is literally even at times just time. The operating model, one makes an assumption that we've got the strategic intent right, or they're fixed on that, but isn't creating airtime. I think you need to do it quarterly to be looking at what is happening now. I'm currently sensing, and just doesn't have to be heavy lifting time, but constant building in constant cycles of review and reinvention. So there's a book there he recommends on how to do that. On the right, from Titanic Syndrome is referenced in the How to Thrive in Chaos book from Nadia Zixenbaya. So that's another book if this is an area of interest that you could reference for that. So now let's get into some of the trends. So um, I didn't think I would predominantly focus on AI in this first briefing, but once I started to break down some things from a time point of view and from an impact, I really felt I needed to start with this. So hold with me on this because I think there's a lot, even it wasn't till I started to connect the dots that we're missing about the opportunity within the industry with AI. So let's start with the birth of AI, which is actually a phrase from 1956, but it feels like the year 2023 has been the birth of AI. So this is a quote from John McCarthy from IBM, and I'm going to just read this because I think it's quite highlighting of us recognizing the pace of change. So we propose that a 2-month, 10-man study of artificial intelligence be carried out during the summer of 1956 at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. The study is to proceed on the basis of conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. An attempt will be made to find how to make machine use language, form abstractions and concepts, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and improve themselves. We think that a significant advance can be made in one or more of these problems if a carefully selected group of scientists work on it together for a summer. So they thought a summer might do it. If we look at a recent timeline, I think we could definitely say in the year 2023 that goal has been realized. It took a long time, but if we look at this timeline from 2014, and we think about the pace of law, if you're familiar with Moore's law, talks about that every 2 years, because of computing power, we will double our capability. We are now starting to surpass Moore's law because of AI advancement. And so if we look, even if we get to 2020, OpenAI, who released ChatGPT, I think everybody's heard of ChatGPT, came into the marketplace. Deep fakes in 2020, we all started to become very aware about deep fakes, or not long after. And if we get to 2022, ChatGPT 3.5 was released. This year, you'll see on this call I've mentioned I'm using Otter AI. It's a really effective transcription tool. I'm using the summary tool in Zoom. I recently used that for a client meeting. It not only summarized the meeting on Zoom, it put it into sections with headlines of each topic, did that within minutes. I changed very little words from a 1 hour meeting, sent it to them afterwards. I told them that I was doing a Zoom summary on AI. Even afterwards, they did not realize it was the AI doing the summary. They would not have picked that up. So I think if we look at 2023, our ability to start to play and use AI, we're all starting to get a better feel for the reality of what it can do. But I'm going to assume that some of you definitely haven't had time to do that. And I want to connect dots at an enterprise level. So we're in the age of AI. And so ChatGPT is the one that we've been hearing a lot about. ChatGPT can do a number of things. There is the free version, then there's the paid versions of ChatGPT. And the paid versions, as they updated, are beyond within months what people could have believed. So you can see there on the left one example where you put in some inputs and it can help you make choices, look at trends, analyze really quickly. This is in ChatGPT. ChatGPT is also connected with DALL-E for image creation. So if you're on LinkedIn, you're highly likely to have started seeing a lot of images that look like this, because everybody's starting to use AI tools to do imagery. The images that I used to promote this event were all done on a platform called Canva, an Australian platform that has built in some really good AI tools. And so we're starting to see these images appear, and so that's a clue that it's been done by AI. Within ChatGPT, they also have Whisper, so it can do transcription. I've mentioned Otter that I'm using for the transcription of this trends briefing. I've even started to use a tool where I can upload text. I can select the type of voiceover that I want, and then it will do the audio for me. So I've used different tools like this over the years, but they're nothing like the speed and accuracy that I'm now seeing. We also then saw Microsoft start this year to talk about Copilot. Copilot, in my mind, for life sciences is going to be a game changer for productivity. I'm not going to go deep into Copilot today, but I think in maybe the next trends briefing I will, because most of you will start to see that little on the right, that icon start to pop up in Word and Excel. And I think it's really important you start to leverage the tool to understand its value. And I'm going to share some of that today of why I think you need to start understanding what it can do, because it really will not only make you more productive, it'll make you smarter. And so Microsoft embedding Copilot, it literally is that. It will be your co-assistant doing many things. And then only last week, Google released Gemini, their version of AI. So they've all been working on these tools for many years, and so the advancements as they release them are going to accelerate. So I'm just going to share a little bit on Gemini here. You may have seen the video that came out. Um, if we reflect back on the word of the year, authentic, it's come out that they enhanced some of the video a little bit. So immediately, what I would say is do not distrust the capability of Gemini. We're now starting to be very wary. Should we believe everything we see? However, the functionality and what it can do may not yet be perfect, but let's not think these are years away. These are months away, what these tools can do. So in that clip, just bringing this back into life science, there in one of their clips, they've got these researchers showing an example where they put in some clinical papers. These are PubMed papers, and Gemini is able to rate the relevance of those papers based on what they're wanting to look at. So I've been using a lot in a master's that I'm doing, AI tools for research. So there's Scholar AI, but there are a lot of other AI tools that I found really good where I can put in a problem statement or an area of interest. It will bring up clinical papers, research papers, and then I can ask for clusters around those papers, and it can gather papers in a way with credence of, I can put in time back ratings, lots of variables that I could never do just on Google or even in Scholar AI. So the Gemini here in this example is able to give you a quality score based on what you're interested in looking at. So just to give you a visual, I think I've got a couple of video clips here, and so just bear with me as it jumps to the next screen, because I'll have to open up the next screen. Let's see if we've got audio.
Okay, based on what you see, come up with a game.
Now, just maybe, I haven't checked whether you can hear the audio. Maybe I'll just check the chat. Can someone tell me if you could hear that audio?
Oh,
Just going to see if someone can just quickly let me know. Oh, perfect. Okay, brilliant. Let's keep going.
and use emojis, please. How about this? We can play a game called Guess the Country. Sure, let's do it. Clue 1. This country is the home of the kangaroo, the koala, and the Great Barrier Reef. Oh, that's easy. Clue 2. This country loves football and has won the most men's World Cups in football history. You were trying to get me to find the paper ball under the cup. I accept the challenge. The cup to the left. Nice.
So that is Gemini in action. So it actually is able to, as you can see, in real time respond to what it's seeing and observing. And so if we just go back to Copilot and it's your assistant, and it's not even potentially, I mean, I haven't actually checked whether Copilot can talk to you. I don't think it can yet, but you can talk to Copilot. I'd encourage you to go look at that. So let's delve into AI a little bit here. So why is it that we're getting the acceleration? Why is it that I want you to really recognize that where we've seen years, 1956 and here we are in 2023, do not assume that rate of change. It's literally months. So when we look at the large language learning models, and the ability of those models as they get better and learn, but also the combination of them, you can see there the ability for what the AI, the computation, what it can do on the right, it's just going next level. Amazon right now is reportedly training AI with twice as many parameters as ChatGPT-4. What I'm seeing online is they're saying we're actually running out of real world data to train the AIs, that they're simulating data. So they're actually going to keep accelerating their rate to add value. So my takeaway on that is do not disregard AI in many elements of the business. And so this is one that I think is critical for the industry to have on their radar, if not already. I'm sure there'll be people in your company that are, but as leaders instigating change, I think you need to have this on your radar. What does this mean? The AI tools for infrastructure, technology infrastructure. It's always been a legacy environment. It's always been data in different silos, years to get things up and running and people using them. I mean, a lot of costs. So what does these changes mean for infrastructure costs? So what I want to touch on is NVIDIA. So NVIDIA, if you've been a gamer, which my son is, he can tell me all about NVIDIA. He can tell me about their graphic cards and how they've been evolving. And they've been a gaming company with a long business game. They've been meaning and planning to be in this space. And so they are now. They've hit the $1 trillion market cap for their GPUs. Their chips are across multiple companies and products. They are in driving a lot of the technology that we're all starting to use. And they've invested heavily in using generative AI and as the thinking system within their chips and the ability of what they can do. So this is just one example. This was actually Gentech talking about how they're using generative AI, NVIDIA's chip, in the lab. Today I'm focusing on commercial, but I thought it was quite good for everyone to know that NVIDIA is working across multiple companies and industries, and they're definitely in health sciences. This is what they're referencing lab in the loop. So where they're doing data gathering, we do the research, we get the data, they're bringing it into the algorithm and able to process the insights faster to bring it back into the loop all the way through. But what I want to focus on is what the CEO, Jensen Huang, has shared at this in this recent interview at Columbia Business School. He is talking a lot about the chips and technology. It's not total tech speak, but that's his wheelhouse. He has been recognized as CEO of the Year. He definitely is a visionary because of the fact of the long game he's been playing. But what he said in this clip is he was talking about internal enterprise AI capability. And he said everybody wants you to think it's super expensive. And he said it's not. And this is how he framed up that it's not. He said that currently we spend 250 billion a year on what we would call today general purpose computing data. It's what we're all using. It's where we store our emails. It's our data lakes. It's our current state. He's saying that the future state is we could take exactly that same money and keep what we've got, but we build what we'd call accelerated computer dating centers that is driven literally by generative AI. And so in my mind, I've been in technology, but I put this into really simple speak. What I hear him saying and what I see online is that we can take what we've already got and we can overlay or plug and play generative AI, and it can help us extract a lot more value from even our existing data sets and be able to connect those. It'll do a lot more than that. But for an industry that has struggled with legacy updating, you don't have to approach it from that way if you embrace AI into your infrastructure. And there was more I've got to share on others saying that. So this is a little bit more what he talked about, is that the data, they're able to compress it so much into such a tiny amount that they can then do more with it. And it becomes what they call semantic models, which means you can interact it with it, which is exactly what AI is. So you can take our existing data, compress it so much that with AI embedded, we can ask AI to deconstruct it or to tell us things or to find things for us. And so this is a slide from Gartner about the trends next year and tech trends. They also reference this. They say, what if AI can minimize legacy code? So they're talking there about the fact we don't need to replace some systems. Where we've had poorly written code and things can't talk to each other, we don't need to rewrite it all. AI can help connect the dots or simulate all of that information for us. And so I'm going to play this clip from Imand Mystique. He's been interviewed by Peter Diamandis from Singularity University. And he is seen as at the forefront of AI. And this is going to pop up with a screen, and it should do hopefully an Insta in a minute. We'll listen to the video clip here.
to get ready for this. The AI has got so good so fast that I think it's here now. And next year is the year of enterprise adoption, and the year after is the year of global adoption. But I think the key thing is, even if we stop today, in 4 or 5 years, we can have an AI tutor for every child. We can organize the global climate, healthcare knowledge. We can make movies just by describing them. What are human?
So my takeaway I want you to have from that is the message on the enterprise level, is that enterprises, when we think about ChatGPT, which is external to us, we may be thinking about Copilot and it's an improving our capabilities within the organization. There is also now AI at the enterprise level and adoption. And I think for me, this is the game changer of the industry. And while we're all now looking at omni-channel and what we might refer to as digital, it actually now means that if we want to go faster and smarter, enterprise adoption is actually how we can do that. And so just building on this, in a sense, is it feasible and is it happening? If we look at where the investment has been going by investment places, the move to generative AI has just it's blowing up. And this is just more to reinforce that generative AI is going to continue to add value. We know there's risks, I'll get into that in a minute, but if we think about it at an enterprise level, really is going to be feasible. And if we look at here, these are vendors that are developing open source tools to help enterprises build and deploy AI projects. So there are lots of ways to go about it within organizations. And here, this was only last week, Gemini was released, and then companies will soon be able to build internal search engines with no coding needed using Google Gemini AI. I heard a stat and I couldn't find it about how long when people are using SharePoint and people aren't storing things in the same way that it takes people to find documents or they don't find them. If you imagine now, even just at a search capability that you can put in parameters into a search and it can go across all of your places in the company where things are stored and it can find the most relevant information and maybe reformat it for you, how much time potentially could be waste even just in people trying to find documents, let alone working with them. So going back to what Jansen said in that clip about the future, and this is a repeating phrase from many people now, AI will not take your job. The person who uses AI will take your job. AI will increase productivity is what he's talking about, which basically gives us growth in companies, which is a great thing. So his narrative is use AI as fast as you can. Now, there is a lot of narrative about safety. We need to be acknowledging that. I'm not going to go into that today because I don't have time. But my takeaway for the industry is for you as an individual and for leaders and organizations, understanding and utilizing AI is crucial because the more you know something, the more you can make choices and understand the complexity of this and also the value proposition. So let me give you some examples of as a worker, as an enterprise worker, why it's going to benefit you by even using some of these tools. So this is research at the start of the year, and then I've got research as the year goes on. ChatGPT sees strong early adoption in the workplace. So we saw that some people started to use it, and one of the examples was people were sharing company information. And so companies very quickly in the industry got very fast at saying, don't share anything that's shouldn't be in the public domain. And so that was wise advice. So what this study showed was there was early adoption by professionals. What I do want to highlight though is that by gender, women have used AI less than men. And healthcare was the lowest by industry. So when I look at the mix of teams in life sciences, typically there's a lot, often it's at least 50-50 or more women. I know diversity and inclusion is an important agenda. And if we look at the industries typically being slower than other industries, it's still doing that. Healthcare had the lowest usage against other industries. So I would be encouraging the industry internally to be creating not just rules, but guidelines and encouragement for people to be using Copilot and crowdsourcing that and being particularly mindful of why women might not be dipping their toe in as much as the men, because you want all of your organization to be sharing their learning, to be learning together. And so then we got into February, same organization said 70% of workers who are using ChatGPT are not telling their boss, and overall their usage had jumped to 43%. So I think this is still a narrative. Those that are potentially using AI, even outside the organization, now are feeling like they shouldn't tell their boss. So if we think about the industry that very quickly set guidelines around what not to do, I would encourage the industry to encourage people what to do and how to leverage these tools, because you do not want to get left behind, particularly if they are available within the organization. And so professional adoption had definitely gone up. Let's just go back there. But AI usage was being concealed. Um, where is the data? Where is the insights that's showing us that it does, by using these tools, improve productivity? So the first thing is we typically would say that, and I still hear this from people because we're all new to this. I'm not going to have them do what I'm good at. Why would I have ChatGPT do copy when I'm good at copy? Well, the point is that actually the capability here, it's talking about speech recognition, images, handwriting. The capability of AI is now superseding our own performance. So why wouldn't you have it as an assistant if it can mean you can spend time on other things, more creative things? And so this quote here from Gartner: early foundation models like ChatGPT, so they're not all ChatGPT, focus on the ability of generative AI to augment creative work. But by 2025, we expect more than 30%, up from zero today, of new drugs and materials to be systematically discovered using generative AI techniques. And that is just one of numerous industry use cases. So in our industry, this is the clinical side, but let's not get left behind on the commercial side. So BCG did a research in-house project with Harvard. It says there the staff instructed to use ChatGPT produce work 40% higher in quality than unassisted peers. And so that bottom comment, I think, is really telling. It says, moreover, it showed that the lowest performers amongst the group had the biggest gains when using generative AI. So if we look at Copilot, it can help you craft presentations really quickly, can design them better, can help you reword languaging. It even in Excel can take where you've got lots of data and you can just ask it to pull out the trends and it will do that immediately for you. And so this quote, referencing this Harvard and BCG study, I think to me resonates why we're wrong if we don't start to learn and understand how to leverage these tools. The fact that we could boost the performance of these highly paid, highly skilled consultants from top elite MBA institutions doing tasks that are very related to their everyday tasks, on average 40%, I would say that's really impressive. In my mind, it's not that we want to get busier. If it can make us better with what we do, but also create more free time for collaboration with peers, for sense making, then these tools are really powerful. However, we do need to think about some of the risk profile, and I'm just looking at the time here. So I knew I might go a little bit over, so I'm going to go through some of this quickly today because the theme I really wanted to come through was the opportunity of AI for enhancing the already existing work. But let's not disregard the risk factors. So it is becoming part of our everyday life. We've got this tension between how much do we want machines to do versus where's the value as humans and where do we bring the human into things. OpenAI, who's behind ChatGPT, themselves all these companies are very much recognizing the risk factor, but they're all approaching it slightly different. They have got this preparedness challenge. You'll see that they've actually highlighted, they're crowdsourcing how we go about this. They're putting it out to the market. It's where you can apply to participate in this. They're looking at individualized persuasion, cybersecurity, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats, and autonomous replication adaptation. So they are running a challenge to help look at ways to manage or mitigate these risks. We've seen this year the White House issued an executive order on some guidance for safe use of artificial intelligence. And then only in the last few days, the European Council, they've written a deal for the first rules on AI in the world. So they have put in place a structure, and they've used a risk-based approach, which makes sense. So again, from an industry point of view, where the industry tends to be very risk averse, I want to highlight, you take a risk-based approach. Do not avoid the enterprise model. As a leader, if you're a country manager, definitely be asking, talking to your IT people, are you embedding it? I will be sharing at the end of this one pharma company's example of their enterprise model. So a risk, this is a risk-based approach. Here in New Zealand, the AI Forum, just only about a month ago, this was November, has released a really good book, a guidebook on how to approach and think about AI. And I think for those in leadership roles, we're not going to be data scientists, but we do need to understand the different types of AI. So in this book, it has got some really good explanations, and they share some case studies of how AI was used. One of them was in the health sector with COVID and managing big data sets. So it's a really good white paper to help you process just again how to think about it, and to build your trust, your understanding, so you can manage it as a leader. So let's just step away a little bit, some still AI, but let's look at what's happening in leadership a bit more holistically and the evolving ways of working. So what's been happening in the leadership landscape in the last quarter? If you look in the grey box, where it says, if I look to the right, they're big and growing in importance. What is the sound bites? And the bottom, big and fading in importance. What you can see in that right top box is generative AI, which is one of the reasons why I focused on it today, because it is growing in importance and people are trying to grapple with it, but also sustainability. Very much awareness there. And I've got some connections. I want to touch on sustainability and healthcare. And interestingly, on the left, small and growing in importance. Can you believe some parts of AI are small, grown in importance, but below Industry 4.0 and things like the metaverse and ChatGPT are actually becoming fading importance. So we're seeing such a shift so quick, but generative AI, sustainability, and maybe not so much economic worries. However, today we announced in New Zealand we're hitting a recession, which I'm surprised they were surprised we're about to do. And here you can see CEOs are very much starting to try to understand a generative AI. If I was an omni-channel lead, if I was a transformational innovation lead, if I was leading a change program, even across sales, medical, and marketing, I would resonate with this in the way that it means that if you're now wanting to start to think about these tools, you want to understand what your organization's doing, so do your CEO. So they shouldn't be surprised, or they should start to welcome these conversations, because CEOs are starting to get their head around it. And so let's look at, from the leadership point of view, IBM in this paper looked at augmenting work. So let's lean into AI as an assistant. It augments the work. So it has reached an inflection point. And so we need to start to think about how we structure our work, how we collaborate across our teams. And so what have we got here? Let's see, I still can't move this here. This is showing AI, what people at different levels of the organization, what they believe is going to have the impact on their role. The takeaway is, for all executives, it's going to have some form of an impact. Very little will it be a low impact. So for all levels of the organization, generative AI will have an impact. And this is interesting. STEM was really high as a skill in 2016. It's dropped down mainly because it's not to say technology is not important, but those traditional coding skills are getting challenged now with the ability of generative AI. And so what's coming up are these human skills of time management and ability to prioritize. So some shifts are really happening. This is also from IBM, trends for next year, and you'll see some overlaps with what I've been sharing. So again, AI becomes a plus in the organization. I think we're going to switch out the word digital for AI, or augmented, or we'll think about digital as smart. And trend 3, conversation on this moves from IT to the C-suite. 4, our operating models are going to need to be more adaptive. They need to be able to bend. And ecosystems mean we need to think and think more broadly than our own ecosystem. It's even connecting our data with organizations outside of us, so that we can collaborate and plan as well. So some real shifts driven by the impact of generative AI. And so if we look at what we've got here, it says here that in fact 43% of CEOs told us the enterprises are already using generative AI. So generative AI is the trend. It's already starting to happen. 36% say the technology is being used for operational decisions. And we expect that to increase. Yet across organizations, more than 60% are still not yet developing a consistent enterprise-wide approach to generative AI. So there still needs to be a strategy, but if you imagine it's going to become more paramount, we have to start now enabling, training, sharing our workforce with those skills. And they need to also want to trust generative AI. And I've just pulled out some of these a little bit more detail, the trends, operating models being so they don't break. So going back to an emergent strategy, if we're going to be more adaptive in our strategies, even our operating models need to shift. And so this, if we see their leaders structure an operating model they can trust to weather a changing world. So that isn't just about how we collaborate, it's about culture, embedding learning organizations, and people really leaning into my take on it is that often I see people really doubting the data in life sciences, or they only have one slice of the view. Embracing generative AI, people should be able to start to trust the data actually more, but they won't do that until you start to give them more evidence of that. So there's quite a lot of shifts that'll go on in the operating model. So let's step away a little bit from technology. Same IBM report, consumer trust and corporate sustainability dropped. Sustainability will continue, will gain more paramount in leaders, what they choose to prioritize. And I do believe when we think about that word of authentic for the industry, I even think your clinicians are going to want to have a view of what your company's doing. It may not make their decision, they'll always lead with the patient. Let's be clear about that. But if your company's doing a lot of good things, then they're probably likely to want to hear about it. And that's building an authentic relationship. And so at the moment, the consumer globally has started to recognize that the data you're giving me may not be the full picture. So we're starting to see Australia and New Zealand have been a little bit slow at even starting to track their sustainability data and then report on it. So this will become more and more paramount. And so it'll come under this umbrella a lot more of ESG. And so I wanted to bring this back to the healthcare environment. This was really recent. Andrew Winston wrote a book, Net Positive, and he was highlighting the Forum for the Future. He has got a relationship with them. But this idea that the climate crisis is also a health crisis. We are definitely seeing that as climate impacts happen, it impacts those communities and that has a health impact. And so we're not going to be separating again. The systems thinking will be linked with our sustainability decisions with health environments. And you can see here that this organization has created a toolbox to help organizations assess where they're at the moment from the climate impact and health. And you can see some healthcare companies are collaborating already with them. And then just to give a little bit, if we think about climate impacts are having impacts at times disproportionately on different communities. But if we think about the umbrella of ESG and we're thinking as leaders about not just in healthcare, the communities you're serving, but also the people within your organization and diversity and inclusion, we've seen some real population changes. So by 2050, 1 in every 4 people on the planet will be African. The New Zealand data is that by 2038, 20% of the population will be married, and a third of that will be New Zealand's children. So that's a real shift in our health population and how we also what will then a lot younger workforce that'll be coming through. And in Australia by 2051, they're predicting the Aboriginal population will be just short of 2 million. And so maybe a smaller percentage of the total, but the jump is becoming really high. And so this is just one paper talking about that population change and then the impact of climate, which will have an impact on health implications. And so this is a real fire hydrant. This is the last bit. So I just wanted to show some bits that has been trending this last quarter for life sciences and healthcare. This I think is really interesting. Reid Hoffman in an interview here with Peter Lee from Microsoft is talking specifically about clinicians using ChatGPT with their patients. And so let me just share this clip with you.
Is now being used in Inbox to propose a draft note to send to a patient. In early studies, patients are preferring the notes generated by GPT-4 and have explicitly said they feel more human than the notes written by the doctors. A doctor is too busy to add those personal touches, like congratulations on just becoming a grandparent, best wishes on your wedding next month in France. Those extra little personal touches, GPT-4 just has the tireless ability to extract those things out of the conversations between doctor and patient, and it dramatically reduces by multiple hours a day the clerical burden on doctors and nurses.
So you can see there that the clinicians are likely they will be starting to use ChatGPT. But don't interchange ChatGPT with other AI tools that are coming. It won't always be ChatGPT. It could be Microsoft Copilot. It could be Gemini. But what I like about what it's saying there is when we've got this tension between technology and human, these tools can actually, where we've seen clinicians are incredibly busy, can add in that human touch, and patients are appreciating it. Australia, Liverpool Hospital partnered with Microsoft. They're using the potential of generative AI with cardiologists. And so here we worked with Microsoft technologists to create a bespoke prototype to allow cardiologists and anyone training in the field to query vast volumes of literature to answer clinical questions or make nuanced comparisons traversing the significant body of literature. So over the years, if we looked at Watson, IBM, there was issues where at times they knew that it could translate some information better than a clinician. Wasn't always as accurate, but we knew it was getting better. Definitely now we're at a time where we know clinicians want the full picture of clinical evidence, and so these partnerships are now starting to happen within the clinical setting. And so here the announcement comes after a new report by Microsoft and the Tech Council of Australia that highlights significant economic and productivity opportunities of generative AI for Australia. It identifies healthcare as one of the 4 economic sectors poised to benefit from the technology. So again, just highlighting that it's going to start to be embedded AI into healthcare, let alone into life sciences. And I just thought this is interesting. So this is again the same thread, ChatGPT to diagnose complex clinical cases. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm not sharing it for this. What I'm sharing it is they then said coming soon is they will have their own AI journal. So if you remember back to Gemini, and they're able to tell you the quality of that paper's, alignment to what you're looking for. There's been, like I said, clinical and research tools that I'm using for using AI. Again, we'll start to use this more and more. So I said I was going to share at an enterprise level one example of a life science company using generative AI at an enterprise level. Bryce Shamel has just been releasing on LinkedIn some insights to what they're doing at Moderna. If you go to their yearly annual reporting for shareholders, this is where you will find this information, even though he's now sharing it on LinkedIn. And so they are openly sharing that they are embedding AI across the whole organization as an enterprise platform. So it's not just in clinical and research, it's also in commercial, it's in customer facing, it's in regulatory. They are building what they're calling a real-time AI company. And at an enterprise level, they're embedding a large language model called MChat. You can see there that their timeline is this year. They've been doing it in bite size, so they've been doing it in an agile release, and they're about ready to embed more. If you see at the very bottom there in August the 9th, what they were using MChat for, but that it will become more business specific. So my take on that is if we look at Microsoft Copilot, they're going to have an internal version of that they feel comfortable for it to go across all of their data points and start to show up in the different functions to support either decision making or collating of data, or even creating slides or collating meeting summaries. A whole lot of, they've developed their own enterprise platform. And alongside that, when we talk about operating models, they're now talking about full that we often see that I think, to me, that the industry is often led with technology. Let's embed it, teach it, but we've not thought about the culture side and embracing it. So they've got a whole strategy there that is about leadership, culture, business integration, and adoption to drive that. So this would have been a slide with digital transformation on a few years ago. We switch that out and it becomes an AI slide, and it really is digital next level. So let's just wrap up the last part. So the thread that's been coming through in the last quarter is, and I've seen this in a number of areas, where the industry is starting to say, so we need to be closer and understand our HCPs better. And so this is data from Fierce Pharma, from an EPG Health study, but I'm seeing this a lot more where people are starting to say, particularly I think as we lean into omni-channel and people want to have diverse data points and serve up the right content, there is this desire there. And so the industry, it says here, is recognizing it's a long way off around the use of data and understanding its impact. And so people are saying, look, we feel we've been on a good journey with our data journey, our digital journey, but now we need to get closer to the customer to serve up better content. However, if I just look here, before I share the next slide, so yeah, the industry is saying they struggle to have meaningful measures of the impact. That's part of the challenge. We're doing work, but we don't know whether it's meaningful. However, if we look at what the HCPs are saying, and this has been a thread for years, 80% of HCPs mistrust pharma's digital content with data cherry picking. So I don't mean that literally in the sense, what I've seen over the years is what HCPs say they would prefer versus what the industry serves up has a constant misalignment. So the industry still continue to be brand led or their own needs led. And so HCPs here is saying, if we look at, what you give me, I trust in its isolation, but you're not giving me necessarily the full picture. And I think this is going to be the tension for the industry. If I think about, if we imagine now generative AI and you think about Gemini or ChatGPT and the tools HCPs will have to use that to go out and find independently data and validate its rigor and get multiple data points, they may not need the industry to do it. And so the industry is going to be challenged of, therefore, you have to not only meet them where they are, but how are you going to give them an experience that really is different, not only meets their needs, but actually leads and does something unique that makes it worth their while. It's going to be, I think, a time for radical disruption. And so on that, just to wrap up, there's been a lot of talk. Everyone's using the phrase channel and content. I think what's missing is context. What you do at a launch versus in market versus a legacy brand is really different. And that word consistency. We go back to the start when I said the word authentic and how we build trusting relationships. As you embrace in your omni-channel journey more and you start to use generative AI and data, and you need to be really transparent and authentic about how you're using that and how you show up. If you only show up every now and then in their inbox, if salespeople only show up every now and then and you're still using a push model, how do you expect to build a relationship that is authentic? So it's not to say you should show up all the time, but based on the context, what would be helpful and what would they expect that builds this authentic relationship? And I think, to me, that's this missing part around channel and content. And so I'm just going to finish with this. If HCPs in-house are going to have a lot of tools, if they're going to be able to search for things, why will a HCP in the future engage with pharma when all the content isn't just searchable? They can search for it really well. What will life sciences do differently when HCPs will be able to gather your data and everybody else's, because a lot of that clinical data will be in the open domain. And so I'll just finish with one video clip to maybe give you a visual of how maybe you'll show up differently.
the craziest, most unrealistic part of Harry Potter were those picture frames that could like represent dead people and that could talk. And now I realize that's actually the most realistic part of Harry Potter. So I mean, I think there's even a couple of startups that are already like you can like download someone's personality, and it's about to get a lot better. There's not a research effort anymore; it's just an engineering effort. Someone just has to put the pieces in place. Aristotle is one of the folks you can talk to already on Conmigo, and you can have a very meaningful conversation. So I think the teacher of the future is really going to make their classroom an amazing experience, like truly experiential learning. They might use the AI. Hey, everyone, we're going to talk to Zeus this morning. Let's get your questions together. Special guest. I always thought the craziest.
So the level of disruption and need could be a lot more radical than the industry is already planning for, but there is an opportunity, I think, for the industry if capturing these tools could actually really transform the value proposition. So that's the last of it. Just want to say thank you. If you've got anything from, you'll get after this the slides in the video. If there's anything else that you would like to ask me, you can contact me at that email. Otherwise, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn off the video and then take any questions and check the chat.